I'm hoping that now we'll have some questions from our panel, and I'll try and be better at introducing people this time round. So have we got the first question? Right, Terry, who is our expert by experience, would you like to ask a question?
3 really great presentations, and the stories there remind us of what we're trying to do here, and the need is great for this change that we need to see. My question's for Lorraine. You mentioned that your son had all the things he had before illness, your brother, sorry, had all the things he had before, then he went to uni. Was it triggered by his behaviour at uni, possibly illicit substances? Because you didn't mention that.
We don't know. We think it sort of as a family. We think there's probably been a few things. My dad was killed in a motorbike accident just before I was 11 and just before my brother was 13. And a while ago, we actually had a conversation with him, and for the first time he said that's when he very first heard voices. Now, we never saw any indication of that, you know. I mean, he was just a teenage boy, you know, and he never ever mentioned it to us. And then we think that probably at university he's probably had cannabis or something, and it's been that combination that's triggered it. But as I say, there's never been any kind of investigation, formal investigation. It's just guesswork, and that's what we've come up with as a family. We can't really discuss it with my brother very often because he's unaware that he's unwell.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Paul Jenkins.
I'd like to ask Georgina a question. I'm very interested in the experience of Christian's personal assistant. Could you say a little bit about what the experience has been of what the personal assistant does, and how you and Christian have been involved in sort of selecting that person?
Yes, certainly. We advertised in the local job centre the first time round. He's had 6 personal assistants altogether. The first one, unfortunately, after 14 months, embezzled £400 out of Christian's bank account. But we knew that it was improving his quality of life, and that we needed to go forward again. Obviously, it unnerved Christian, but he too wanted to carry on. So we carried on. The next 4 were all totally a disaster, to be quite honest. One of them, I would say to Christian, what have you been doing today? He gets 12 hours a week. And he'd say, because we live near Lakeside Shopping Centre, he took me to Lakeside to a cafe, and I drank about 6 cups of coffee. And I said, you know, does he talk to you? And he said, no, not very often. So that wasn't any good. Also, I think a very valid point about the direct payment scheme, I think it's wonderful. And in our case, it's for a personal assistant, but they don't get any training whatsoever. And the first people we had were forever phoning me up, so I wasn't getting any rest, saying, what do I do when this happens? What do I do when Christian's hearing voices? What do I do about this? What do I do about that? You cannot put someone with a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia and just say, there you go, get on with it. They've got to have some level of understanding of what they're dealing with. And then he had an older lady. He chose them all himself. You know, we had the people round and interviewed various people. And that didn't work because she was too much older than him, but he sort of liked her as a person. And finally, we got the PA Christians with Now. I've brought a book along with me that she's put together, and our local trust actually paid us some money to use the book and turn it into a training manual for their own staff. And she's taken photographs, you know, when she's taken him out. And Christian has done more in the last 5 years with Denise than he did in all those years leading up to it. So when he rings me from London and says, Mum, we're sitting outside a cafe and in a little while we're going to see some show, to me that is absolutely wonderful, because he had all those years of isolation. But I stress it has to be the right person. She had a mother with bipolar, and a daughter with ADHD, so there was her training. She knew much more about how to go on with Christian than the other PAs. I just think it can make such a massive difference. And also us Paul and I getting the breaks, because then that recharges our batteries and we're able to carry on caring. So we're all for direct payment.
Liz, would you like to ask a question?
All three stories are horrifying in a way, but not surprising. And I was left wondering whether anyone really regards themselves as being in charge of your sons, daughters, siblings. Is there anyone whose job, bonus, annual report depends on succeeding to some extent in improving the quality of life of the people you love? Or is it just a sort of morass of people who you don't quite know who's doing what?
If I can just say that, I think the people in charge is my wife and I and my daughter. That's the reality of it. Now, obviously, we're, I suppose, difficult to say, but I suppose, a middle class, reasonably educated person, and we're able to fight for his rights. But I think it's, at the end of the day, if the carers dropped out of it, then the whole thing, I think, would collapse for tens of thousands of people. My son was very ill for 5 years. I won't go into the detail, but it was horrendous, terrible, horrendous. And then he did get onto the right medication, olanzapine, and he's on a level now. But his cognitive functioning is he can't make any decision for himself. He's perpetually anxious, and I mean he's just a very fragile mind. He's got a very fragile mind. He's dropped off the radar now because he's living with us. And we did try the personalised thing, but the amount what they offered, and Steve wasn't very cooperative with it, so there was difficulties there. But I suppose the answer to your question, who's in control? I think we are, and it worries me when I die.
Thank you to the three carers that have spoken, and as someone with lived experience, like it's a powerful, like support. But I want to know how we best support the people who are supporting the people with the illness. How you each feel that you would be best supported.
Well, for me, I would say it's only been in the last couple of years through the direct payment scheme and getting some respite from Christian. Now, we see our son every day. I had a carer say to me recently, "Oh, you get direct payments." And it's very difficult for me, like Terry, because I work in health. I think people sort of look at me as someone who, you can get anything you like. But Christian social worker knows that we see our son every single day of our lives and have done for the past 21 years. This lady's son lived 40 minutes away by car, and she sees him 2 hours a week. So there's carers and carers. It depends on, how much caring you put in. We've done everything I feel that we could possibly do to support our son, even to buying a hot tub and putting it at the bottom of the garden so that he can relax. He had the talking therapy concept of the other mind, which made a massive difference. But as I said earlier within my speech, it was 3 years, and we were very, very lucky to meet a doctor called Diane Lefevre, who was absolutely wonderful to us and knew what was needed, because she set up I was part of a carers group where 7 of us used to go every week. That was again for 3 years, all just sitting talking to each other. So that was wonderful. If you meet someone like her, it makes all the difference. She's actually written a whole chapter for my latest book called A Balanced Approach, and what she's saying about schizophrenia is, if someone's got sugar diabetes and an ulcerated leg, you don't just treat the sugar diabetes, you treat the ulcerated leg. it needs this and it needs this and it needs this. It's all in the book anyway. Thank you.
Robin Perry, Professor of Psychiatry.
It's a more general question, and I guess it also comes out of some of the things that we heard in the first session. And I teach new psychiatrists and new nurses who come into the mental health profession enthusiastic and caring and wanting to do better, and yet somehow or other the system ends up, and you mentioned Diana Lefebvre, you meet individuals who keep this enthusiasm and this care. What do you think it is that happens to the rest so they end up not caring and not bothering?
I can answer that. The work I do, you've heard a couple of the poems. I've written hundreds and hundreds of them. And when I do talks for nurses, and I've always said, anyone who works hands-on with patients should have service user and carer training, so that they understand the impact of when this happens in the family. And very often the nurses end up crying when I do my talks. And I think they need that. I think they need refresher courses every now and then to make them, be aware of this doesn't go away. This is something, once it's happened, that's it for the rest of your life. So when they become hardened, which I suppose is inevitable, if they had those refresher courses, I think that would make a difference.
Can I just to add to that and just endorse that? I give a talk to psychiatrists as part of their ongoing training, and I do about 4 or 5 a year. And all I can say is, and what I do is I read out a section of I wrote a chapter of a book on schizophrenia, and it's actually about, I call it the worst day in my life, and it's actually about the pain that I suffered, and my wife and my children and my daughter suffered. And I just read that out, and then I just say to them, look, this is how, and then I say about the things about what helped us, and how the psychiatrist was brilliant, but how this thing didn't work, and how that thing worked, and how that, and all I can say is, I've been doing it for 3 years, they keep asking me back, and psychiatrists come up to me and say to me, even, in their 30s and 40s, say, I never really fully understood the pain that you carers are suffering. And so I'd endorse that. So I think that ongoing training, I know it sounds simplistic, but I think that is crucial. I think that you've just got to keep lighting that passion. And the passion comes from the people, the carers and the individuals. And both in success as well. We've got to hear about success.
John?
Thanks. I knew being involved with this was going to be thought-provoking, and certainly I've had lots of thoughts provoked by what the 3 of you have said. And indeed what the 5 presentations that we've had this morning. And one of the things I'm now struggling, sort of wrestling with, is what I took from Andrew and Angela this morning was what you were saying about the importance of hope and optimism. Terry, I think I heard what you were saying was you were worried that a sort of unrealistic optimism was now informing policy. And I'm just wondering, so what do we need to do about that then? How do we hold on to optimism and hope, which is important, but stay grounded in reality too, which is what I think I heard you say.
It's a very difficult one, but I mean the bottom line is, and what I say is, it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to end up. And if we get the ingredients right, early intervention, and getting all the kinds of things of supporting carers straight on, there's a whole list, raft of things that we can get right. I suppose what I'm saying, and why I'm being I suppose to some degree cynical, in that what worries me under the current climate. I mean, I read in the news that they're now in Ireland, if you've got somebody with learning difficulties, you don't get any support because there's nobody there because of the cuts. And that's my worry, is that we can oversimplify the needs of people with schizophrenia. I think it's quite, and my belief, it is complex, but it's not. But it's not difficult. You know, things like peer support. There are very simple things you can do, but my biggest worry is people. You know, is the new generation of dual diagnosis. I don't think we've kind of touched that yet. So I'm just going around the corner here. Now, overall, I'm optimistic. I'm an optimist. I passionately believe that that people with schizophrenia can live qualitative lives, but we mustn't be too simplistic about it. It's quite complex. My fear is that some policymakers, are not seeing the simplicity. Things like, personalisation, as you're saying, 10 out of 210. That's a worry, and a lot of you have probably read about what happened on the Isle of Wight, where they just took them to court, took them to court over it. So we just got to be mindful and watch that.
Jeremy Lawrence, who's the health editor for The Independent.
I was just, Terry mentioned the famous series by Marjorie Wallace in the Times, which painted this appalling picture of the state of community care around the country at the time. And what really shocked me was to hear Lorraine's story of the home where her brother is, and which makes it clear that these places still exist. And I wonder whether I can ask Terry and Georgina whether you, as experienced carers, recognising the difficulty that Lorraine faces, where your brother is in a home, you don't know whether by protesting you'll make it worse for him. He's not complaining. You don't know what's out there. You don't know whether moving him might actually make it worse. How do you deal with that sort of situation? How do you, does the CQC get involved, the Care Quality Commission? How do you improve the situation for someone in that position?
They should get involved, shouldn't they? They absolutely should get involved.
The CQC?
Yeah. I'm actually doing some work for them at the moment. But I've written in my latest book a poem called Mini Institutions. My son is very, very lucky. Like Terry and his wife, we've supported him all the way. He lives in supported housing, semi-supported housing. There's staff there from 9 till 5. He doesn't even use them because he doesn't have to. But there's a young man living next door to him who's got no support whatsoever. And that's how I see him. He's in a mini institution with no help whatsoever. And I actually heard him talking to his voices one day and knocked on his door, and he denied that he was hearing voices, and then 2 social workers knocked on the door. And I then went, because I know they're probably thinking, oh God, it's her again. So I went out to my car, started the car up, and they came out. And I wound the window down and I said, he's not very well at all, is he? And she said, no, but we're keeping our eye on him. I thought you'd check to see if he's still alive. That's what I think. So, okay for Lorraine's brother if he comes out and there's a package in front of him that's going to support him and he's going to get the care. But if he isn't, families.
I think it's not as bad as it was with Marjorie Wallace, because I actually went round with her on some of these absolute horrendous places, and it's certainly not as bad as that. But there are still, we all that was at Castlemaine and things like that with the elderly and the other learning difficulties. I think the answer on a personal basis is, that justice is justice and injustice is injustice, and you've got to expose it. But it is difficult if you're an individual carer and you are worried about, any retribution that you're going to get. But I think this is where organisations like Rethink, dare I say, come in, and where carer organisations come in, where you're a collective. And so, we did run a carers group in Southampton for a while. We don't do that any longer, but we were running there, and we were like advocates. So they went to, so people who were coming to us and saying, oh, you know, my son, daughter, or whatever, has had a tremendous time, we'd say, okay, we'll help you write the letter, and then you can write at the bottom of it, this is coming, you know, support from the carers, the Southampton Carers Group. So all of a sudden, people aren't talking to an individual, and they don't feel an individual, they're actually, you know, it's a collective support. So I think that there's always going to be a need for advocacy, and Rethink is actually, apart from SANE, but they're not a membership organisation, is probably the only organisation in the country which is actually speaking up for people with schizophrenia.
What about Mind?
Well, Mind is out there, but I'm talking about schizophrenia as a condition.
Well, Mind represent people with schizophrenia as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll accept that, and I do accept that Mind do a tremendous work, and I am a member of Mind. All I'm saying is that what we need is powerful advocates.
Okay, I'm aware, again, we've run out of question time really for our audience, so I'm going to ask one of the questions. I'm aware there's a few of the questions here that have come up for the panel specifically, rather than from our experts. What I will say is that I will give the questions that have been given to the panel later after this session, so that we can kind of have some discussion about them, and so that at least those questions will reach us. But the question I'm going to ask is this one, which is, based on your experience, all three of you, is there one particular thing that would be changed in our healthcare, in mental health services, or in wider society, such as schooling, etc., which would have made a significant difference for your family or your relative with schizophrenia?
Very quickly, I think just knowledge and understanding. And I think that for people to understand that the brain malfunctions in exactly the same way as the heart and the kidneys, we've got to get that across to people. That, you know, we're just talking about a malfunction which is mixed up with a whole range of environmental things. We know in the same way as, you know, as a plumber could well struggle with arthritis in later years. So for me, it's about the one thing that we need to do is knowledge and understanding of mental illness, and then hopefully people will begin to empathise with it.
Thank you.
I'd just like to say, just pointing to stigma. When Christian came home after 5 years in care, he was 28, to this brand new flat, his neighbours staged a protest at school over the road. We don't want the mentally afflicted living near us. They wrote to the newspapers. And the night my son moved in, and in my chapter I've called this Welcome Home, persons unknown smashed every security light around the building. So why isn't there training in schools, is what I'd like to know. There's training on physical health. What about mental health? I've approached many schools. Oh no, we can't fit it into the curriculum. Oh no, we haven't got a budget to do it. So that future generations grow up understanding these illnesses, and families like ours don't have to go through the untold pain that we've gone through due to stigma. Christian was actually pulled out of a swimming pool by 2 uniformed police officers and asked, why are you in there while there's children in there? Because he'd been questioned the day before as to, you come swimming a lot by the lifeguard. And Christian, being Christian, said, yes, I've got schizophrenia. And all hell broke loose. And it was actually a head teacher of a local school that reported my son. And Rethink used this story for the money to get the time to change. And they did a film of a young man who looked just like my son. So we need more training in schools.
Thank you. Lorraine, would you like to say?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, obviously, I think all our stories are quite different. So from my perspective, far more information and support from social services, etc. You know, just sort of greater support from the services that are out there, and actually just some basic help would be quite nice, I think.
Thank you very much for our speakers. I mean, I think what you've highlighted as well is that everyone's story is completely different as well, and you can't pigeonhole people. Everyone's got different needs and different experiences. But I think the overall message is we need to listen, and I really do think there are messages there that we need to pick up on and take away.